I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe and the murder trial for his alleged killer, Karen Read. Now, no one witnessed this alleged crime, so prosecutors need to enlist the help of experts to prove to the jury what happened here. Take a look. In the pre-dawn hours of a snowy January morning in 2022, the lifeless body of Boston police officer John O'Keefe was discovered face up in the front yard of 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. A dedicated cop and beloved uncle, O'Keefe's sudden violent death sent shockwaves through the community. His girlfriend Karen Read, a finance professor, was quickly cast from grieving partner to accused killer. Prosecutors claim she dropped him off at the home of a fellow officer after a night of drinking and then struck him with her SUV while backing up and left him to die in the cold. They point to broken taillight fragments, a cracked rear light on her vehicle, and expert testimony putting together a digital timeline. But Read's defense tells a different, darker story of a brutal beating inside that house, a cover-up, and a law enforcement conspiracy to frame Karen Read. As the courtroom drama unfolds, the jury must weigh the evidence and figure out how John O'Keefe died. They need to prove it. And then this hour is going to be extremely important in understanding the Karen Read trial and the prosecution here. They have that burden. I cannot emphasize to you too much how important that concept is. You have the burden of proving the case beyond any and all reasonable doubt. And the first time around, prosecutors did not do that. And one of the elements they need to prove is exactly how John O'Keefe died and that Karen Read is responsible. So they need to link her SUV to the death of John O'Keefe. And that's why in this retrial, they have called Dr. Judson Welcher to the stand. And this is an important expert witness that the jury needs to believe and needs to believe beyond a reasonable doubt for prosecutors to win this case. So I want to show you part of his testimony and what he did. And this part of the testimony is what everyone's calling the blue paint experiment, trying to show to this jury how John O'Keefe was impacted and contacted and struck by Karen Read's SUV based upon the information and evidence that's available. Let's take a look.
Let's have the car drive into me. I did this at very low speeds, and you'll see, and we'll throw this from two different angles. That's me showing I'm doing test 2. This is from a camera that we have pointing down at it. This is the speed. You'll see it's only about a 2-mile-an-hour impact. But even a 2-mile-an-hour impact redirects me back and causes me to rotate and take a step. So similar to the other test, this is the post-contact image of the transfers onto my arm. Actually, the yellow paint, you can see from my hand is here. This is from the arm and forearm.
Do you have an opinion whether, based on the data and based on the physical damage and your testing, whether that is consistent with a collision or a impact with Mr. John O'Keefe?
It is consistent with the collision as long as it's greater than approximately 8 miles an hour.
Based on all the evidence you considered, could you share with the jury what your opinion is to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty about whether the defendant's Lexus struck Mr. O'Keefe on January 29, 2022, around 12:32 a.m.? I can answer.
Yes, based on the totality of the evidence, DNA, everything I've talked about, that is consistent with that happening. With a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that is what happened.
Objection, move to strike.
This is so important, so significant, and brings us to the first question in our investigation tonight. And it's about this experiment. Should the jury trust the blue paint experiment? Should the jury trust it? Joining me, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and board-certified forensic pathologist. She's testified in many high-profile cases, Dr. Priya Banerjee, both here to help us try to answer this question. Cody, let me start with you to put some more facts out on the table here. How does this experiment and the results of this experiment line up with the actual injuries that we've seen time and time again on John O'Keefe's arm?
Well, of course, Vinny, since this whole case has been unfolding, there has been a lot of speculation about the source of those injuries on John O'Keefe's arm, specifically how they got there. Was it Chloe the dog that we've heard so much about? Was it actually the Lexus? Was it even a scavenging animal in the middle of the night when his body was laying there? So there have been lots of questions. But what Dr. Judson Welcher, put together with this blue paint experiment, trying to show people how this possibly could have happened from the Lexus. He has the blue paint on where the taillight would have been. The Lexus bumps into his arm in a similar spot to where those injuries are found on O'Keefe's body, showing the point of impact where that taillight and the taillight glass could have shattered and apply those injuries to his arm. So it's kind of spot on as far as where the injuries fall on O'Keefe's arm.
Okay, Dr. Priya Banerjee. Let's talk about this experiment. Should the jury trust this blue paint experiment that we just saw? We see the results. What does it tell you? How much do you trust it?
Sure. So I've never seen anything like it, but I agree that they're sort of recreating the pattern or the areas of contact on the arm. Two things that stuck out to me. One is when Dr. Welcher was recreating it, he sort of rolled off the right shoulder. And I don't recall John O'Keefe having any bruising there. So if that's a point of contact where the roll is happening, it would be my right shoulder here. I'm curious that there's no injury there. Do you see that, how the shoulder's contacting?
Dr. Banerjee,
well
that is amazing. I didn't even think about that, but let's watch it in slow motion. Arm contact, but the shoulder's getting hit. Obviously, this car's going 2 miles an hour, but the actual vehicle's going 20 miles per hour or so. So you would expect to see some sort of shoulder impact injury.
Well, I think anywhere from the tissues, the soft tissues of the upper arm, the muscles, the skin, all the way up to the joint, potentially. 24 or over 20 miles an hour is more significant than many more times than what's in the video, correct? This was 2 miles an hour. And I'm not sure it's really hitting the knee at all, right? They were saying that there's a small abrasion there. I don't know what to make of it, but I don't know if the thigh's making contact. I've tried to watch it many times from the different angles. So I can't really accurately comment, but the absence of shoulder injury made me pause a little bit.
Yeah, we can see there, you can almost, you can't really see the knee from that particular angle.
It's hard.
Right,
yeah.
right. Very, very difficult. And they didn't put any blue paint down there to try to see if the knee would get the same sort of spot.
But do you see where he rolls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
secondary. It's sort of like a secondary point of contact, if you will. But if that's what's spinning him, I would think there'd be something there with significant backup acceleration of the car.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's something that the defense will mention at some point during their expert testimony. All right, Cody, let's go back in time, because you alluded to this, but what has the defense said about the possible dog attack in all of this?
Well, Vinny, naturally, the defense has a response to this, and it involves Chloe the dog, that dog that was owned by the Alberts, who lived at the house where everything went down. Now, Dr. Marie Russell, she's a dog bite expert. She testified during the first trial on behalf of the defense, saying that John O'Keefe was attacked by a dog. Now, in the months before this current second trial, there was a Daubert hearing regarding Dr. Russell's testimony. Now, a Daubert hearing is pretty much a hearing that determines whether scientific evidence or an expert's testimony is reliable and admissible to bring into court during the case. Here's what Dr. Russell had to say during that Daubert hearing.
Do you have an opinion with regard to the nature and source of the wounds on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
Those wounds were inflicted
by a dog attack. Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty? Yes.
Did you ever discuss going to see Chloe and doing these studies on Chloe so you could see if they were dissimilar to these abrasions?
I was asked to evaluate the wounds.
Do you know that Chloe exists, that we provided notice to you, that we went up and saw Chloe and took molds? Did you know that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Did you know that? Going to allow it. Did you know that, Doctor?
I do know that now.
Now that you know that Chloe's available, wouldn't those molds be helpful? Wouldn't you want to look at them and compare them to the distances on the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow it.
I don't think it's necessary for many reasons.
Now, Vinnie, Judge Cannone said that Dr. Russell can testify during this trial. Now, of course, the defense hasn't begun their case yet, but Judge Cannone also said the prosecution can challenge her credibility under cross-examination.
All right, Dr. Banerjee, we saw the blue paint experiment. We've heard some of the conclusions of the dog expert. What are your thoughts in taking a look at both scenarios here?
Right. I still think that not knowing enough about Chloe the dog, but having owned German Shepherds, I mean, I think a dog bite analysis by experts is very important. So I would be curious to see what the cast, if the cast lines up. Now, my understanding is the state or the prosecution doesn't have any forensic dentist or veterinarian to even address this, even though they have, isolated or located Chloe. And so that's curious to me why they're not sort of going after it. Maybe they'll have it in rebuttal. But I would be curious to see. I've dealt with dog bite related deaths, and they can be quite vicious. And some of these, really are suspicious for puncture wounds. So I think that might be atypical for the shattered tail light. Again, the reconstruction that I think is leads you astray is that it's not at the same speed and the tail light cover's not breaking. Obviously, we can't hit anybody with that legally,
Right.
but
that's part of the challenge here.
The limitations, right? But at the same time, it doesn't truly capture the force that someone's being hit with. And so if this is the best we have, 2 miles per hour is 1/10, 1/12 the speed, that is where I don't know how a jury's going to take that. Are they going to say, well,
Sounds
that's
to me like
bogus, or
you
are
don't
they
have
gonna
100% trust in it in answering
No,
our questions.
no,
Exactly.
I don't.
Okay.
And that's really the hard part about it.
And that's the challenge. The challenge for prosecutors. They have the burden. Okay. Guests are staying with us. Coming up next, should the jury trust the crash dummy experiment? Karen Read is in the midst of the retrial of the century.
She is factually innocent. She's guilty.
There's something wrong in this county.
Come at me.
John O'Keefe was killed by that defendant, Karen Read.
She's the victim of a corrupted investigation that was never about the truth.
Another big day here at the Dedham Courthouse.
Fight on. Nothing's breaking me, Matt.
You'll see it all unfold right here on Court TV.
The Karen Read Murder Retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
In a healthy...
Or do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty whether John O'Keefe's injuries on his arm, inevitably in the back of his head, are consistent with being struck by a Lexus identical to the defendant's Lexus on January 29, 2022?
Yes,
What's your opinion?
that it is. It is consistent with being struck by a Lexus and ultimately contacting a hard surface such as frozen ground.
That's the expert opinion that jurors must believe beyond a reasonable doubt to convict Karen Read. And that doesn't necessarily get them a murder conviction, but it gets them a conviction, because then it puts Karen Read's SUV in contact, causing the death, which is an element of the crimes that have been charged here, causing the death of John O'Keefe. Extremely important. So This expert talking not just about the car, but also about the injuries suffered by John O'Keefe. We saw the blue paint experiment talking about the arm, but they also did an experiment relative to the injuries on the back of John O'Keefe's head. Take a look.
What I did was I did what are called drop tests. I took an anthropomorphic test device, ATD, which is just a fancy name for a crash test dummy, and dropped it backwards onto a hard surface to look at what happens if you were to, say, fall backwards and hit your head onto a hard surface. Shoulders come in, then the head contacts the ground. What you see is if you fall backwards and land on a very hard surface or hard surface, you'll get extremely high loads on the head. Watch when the shoulders hit the ground, then the head hits the ground. It creates kind of an arc path that will drag and slide objects up the head. So if you have something such as a baseball hat, it'll cause it to drag across the scalp, dragging it up to a similar location to where these abrasions are.
Another extremely important part of this case. We're talking about the head injuries that really caused the death of John O'Keefe. The arm injuries are allegedly from the contact with a broken tail light, right? But it's the head injuries that actually caused his death. And how did he get these head injuries? Could it be from just being knocked over and falling backwards? I guess spinning and then falling backwards. And that brings us to the next question in our investigation. Should the jury trust the crash dummy experiment? The dropping, which they are saying shows that it would be consistent, the injuries on his head with falling backwards. Joining me to help answer all this, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and board-certified forensic pathologist Dr. Priya Banerjee. Cody, obviously this isn't the only witness talking about this issue, so let's remind folks, or folks who may not be familiar, about the other Commonwealth expert witnesses talking about these injuries to his head.
Well, of course, Vinnie, and as you were just touching on, we know the most severe injuries to O'Keefe's body were on his head, that laceration to the back of his head. Now, what's important about this experiment and what Dr. Welcher was displaying with John O'Keefe's body and that crash test dummy body falling is that it aligns with testimony from Dr. Isaac Wolf, the neurosurgeon who took the stand earlier in this trial, and the medical examiner, Dr. Irina Scorti-Bello, who talked about O'Keefe's head injuries. Take a listen to what they had to say.
The only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull. His injuries were very substantial, and it's more probable than not that at some point he quickly became unconscious and was unable to do functional activities.
This is a picture taken at the time of autopsy. This is the back of Mr. O'Keefe's head. The hair has been shaved off so that the injury can be clearly photographed, and it's a laceration with an associated abrasion.
How long was the laceration?
I measured it as 2.5 centimeters, which is close to an inch. When we pulled back the scalp, I noted that there was blood, what we call hemorrhage, under the laceration or associated with the laceration on the back of the right head. And then furthermore, there were skull fractures associated with that laceration abrasion on the right side of the head.
Now, Vinnie, something interesting about Dr. Scorti-Bello's testimony there. She actually went on to say that she did not discover any injuries to O'Keefe's body that were consistent with a vehicle hitting him.
Yeah, that was huge. That's why they had to bring in more experts, the prosecution did. Dr. Priya Banerjee, we took a look at the way this crash dummy is falling. We've watched the blue paint experiment as well. So, in conjunction with one another, should the jury trust this crash dummy experiment?
Well, I feel vindicated because I've said it could have been a fall. So I think the crash dummy really shows a very typical pattern that we see at autopsy of deadly injury. You can see that the dummy doesn't try to, obviously it's a dummy, but recapitulate someone not breaking their fall, right? Falling backwards, they don't put their hands out, there's no effort to stop it, and the back of the head takes the entire impact. So that laceration is an impact site, and the forces that hit the back of the head go through the skull, causing skull fractures, and that coup contra coup sort of rattling of the brain within the skull. I think this clearly shows it. Now, I don't think it necessarily connects to the car, because Mr. O'Keefe could have slipped and fell, as I've discussed before, that this is slippery snow, like blizzard conditions with frozen ground. And so in and of itself, if you slip and sort of twist and fall, like they're saying, spin around, whatever, if you're not breaking your fall, the back of the head is a very typical spot to impact and cause these injuries.
So just for clarification, the impact of the car, that sort of grazing of the arm and turning the spinning of John O'Keefe, as the prosecution is describing it, and the way they're doing the falling of this dummy, do those two things line up with one another from your perspective?
I think it's a possibility. I don't think it's definite.
Okay. Great job, Dr. Priya Banerjee. Thank you so much. Your time is so valuable, and we really appreciate it. Cody's sticking around. You're not going anywhere, Cody. Up next, should the jury trust the laser scan experiment? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe. A lot of the evidence in this case came from people who interacted with John O'Keefe and his girlfriend Karen Read, who's accused of murdering him, but none of them saw what allegedly happened. So now prosecutors are trying to prove their case with experts. Here's the story. It was a snowy January night in Canton, Massachusetts, when the lives of Boston police officer John O'Keefe and his girlfriend Karen Read collided with fate. The couple had been drinking, first at a bar and then continuing into the early morning hours. Tensions simmered beneath the surface as the alcohol flowed freely. At some point that night, prosecutors allege Karen dropped John off at 34 Fairview Road, a home belonging to a fellow officer. But John never made it inside. Hours later, his lifeless body was discovered in the snow-covered yard, battered and bruised, eyes swollen shut, cuts on his arm, and blood beneath his head. The storm had buried secrets and possibly evidence. Investigators turned to Karen's SUV, pointing to a shattered taillight and an alleged digital timeline that told the story of murder. They say the vehicle was the weapon, her anger with John the motive. But Karen insists she's being framed, the victim of a cover-up. What truly happened that icy night? That question will be answered by the jury, who must figure out what really happened to John O'Keefe. A big part of this case has obviously focused on that taillight, the broken taillight. And there are a lot of videos that have been very relevant to that issue, and a lot of videos that have been used as evidence in this case. And sometimes it's by the prosecution, sometimes by the defense. Because like everything else in this case, none of the videos are super clear. Like you see something, but it almost depends upon your perspective as to what you are seeing, despite the fact that it's a video. So something that the prosecution has done in this case is try to clarify one of the videos. It's one of the videos we've been looking at from the beginning of this case, which is Karen Read backing out of the garage on John O'Keefe's driveway as she is going to look for John O'Keefe. And John O'Keefe's car, SUV, is parked behind it, and she gets very close and seems to contact it. But you really can't tell. You can't see everything. You can't see the details of that contact. So I want you to take a look at what prosecutors put together through their expert using laser scans and overlays to try to give the jury a more detailed look at that video so you can see what you can't see in the video. Take a look.
We went out to Mr. O'Keefe's residence and took a scan, laser scans. And so what we can do is use this information in conjunction with the video to create a scaled version of the video. There's a laser scan, there's the video. So we've overlaid the laser scan of the Lexus onto the Lexus. We've overlaid the laser scan of the Chevrolet onto the Chevrolet. And we've overlaid the laser scan of the scene onto the scene. From all that information, again, we lined it up in the video, we lined it up in the scene, we have the two vehicles. We can get the exact position of the vehicles when that Lexus stopped. And it's hard to see because of the angles and because these vehicles are not at right angles to each other, the exact contact. So we took a whole bunch of data points within those two areas where the snow got dislodged, and we're looking at where that is. So if you look at that on the vehicle, so this is where it is on the rear of Mr. O'Keefe's Chevrolet. Again, I had the opportunity to inspect Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle. There's no damage.
So with this laser, they're trying to show the jury what on the video, what you can't see on the video. It's fascinating, right? It's technology, but it brings us to the next question in our investigation. Should the jury trust the laser scan experiment? Is this trustworthy? Does this make sense? Can you believe in what you are seeing beyond a reasonable doubt? Joining me to help figure this all out, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and retired investigator and host of the podcast Profiling Evil and the author of the book Deceived, Mike King is with us as well. Great to have you both here. Great to see you. Cody, first of all, put some perspective on this because not everyone will remember. And we need to be reminded, why is this particular video of Karen Reed's SUV backing up? It doesn't show the accident, but why is this so important in this case?
Well, Vinny, this is crucially important because this would further the defense's story that all the damage to the taillight was done in that driveway at John O'Keefe's house at One Meadows, and that no damage to the taillight was done at 34 Fairview whatsoever. Now, what's also important is that, to remind viewers, before the first trial, we had David Yannetti and Alan Jackson actually on this program doubling down on that claim. Take a listen.
What's the significance of this video? And is this where the tail light was actually shattered from your perspective, not during the murder of John O'Keefe?
Yes, there's no doubt that's when the taillight was shattered. And by the way, that's at 5 in the morning, 4.5 hours after it was supposedly shattered the night before. The taillight was intact when she left Brian Albert's house.
Now, of course, Vinny, this is quite different from the prosecution presenting evidence that all the pieces of the taillight were found on the lawn at 34 Fairview. So up to the jury to decipher all of this.
Absolutely. And there was one small piece that was missing that they never found.
Right.
So let me ask you, Mike King, this technology, this laser scan, taking a video, then recreating the video, but then giving us different angles of that video. Should the jury trust that?
Absolutely, Vinny. If the quality of the scan is up to par, and I would think it is based on what we're seeing, because there's a couple of crucial things that happen in this thing. These 3D scans are actually, in some pieces of software, down to the centimeter. I mean, that's really accurate. But what they've done and what Dr. Welcher brought out in his testimony that I thought was so powerful is that he brought out that there are key points, anchor points, that they can line everything up with. He was using the fence posts. He was using marks on the property lines and other things that brought into scale everything that was there. Then he brought the actual imagery and place that imagery against the same background. And then when they started putting those tracks down and showing those impact points, which I think we'll probably talk about in a moment, that's where it really comes together and where the science is finally explained in a way that a jurist can sit and listen to and say, oh man, I feel like I'm there.
Right, and what the expert is saying through this laser scan is that the contact point isn't the tail light itself. It's the bumper or the lower part that's going to stick out more, and that's significant, right? This is so important to the defense, but important for the prosecution to try to eliminate the possibility of the tail light being partially broken, not fully broken like here, but partially broken in the driveway, because they are saying, the defense is saying it gets fully broken once police get it, and they're the ones who do it. Let me ask you this, though, Cody. What has Karen Read said about that taillight damage? Because that is evidence in this case as well.
Well, Vinnie, Karen Read is, of course, furthering a similar narrative. And one of those clips that we have seen in court during this trial, one of those clips during her interview with Gretchen Voss, Karen Read actually talks about finding pieces of the taillight in the driveway at One Meadows. Take a listen.
When my car was seized, there was a few small pieces of taillight missing that I had picked out at John's at 5:45 before we drove over to Fairview. I'm showing Jim and Carrie, look what I just did to my light, and I'm worried that there's gonna be some kind of electric short circuit. There's like the bulb is showing and some of the red plastic's missing. So I picked pieces out of the light housing that had kind of collapsed within the light and dropped them in John's driveway.
So again, Vinnie, Read sitting there emphasizing the fact that no damage was done to the taillight at 34 Fairview, and it all happened in that driveway.
Yeah, so Mike, your thoughts about this, all right? The laser scan experiment versus Karen Read saying that it was sort of pushed in. She's picking out some pieces from that taillight, dropping them there. Your thoughts about how these two pieces of evidence, you know, who wins that battle?
Well, I think it's going to boil down to whether the jurists like Karen Read sitting there, like the stories, like all the changing narratives, if the prosecution can successfully bring that up. And you can't keep throwing out ideas and saying this is what happened and then have somebody come back and prove that that's not the case. If we believe what's happened here, and personally I believe that scan that was conducted, and I really like the science behind that. And it impeaches her, in my opinion, Vinnie, but you know what, I'm the cop that was showing up at the scene, not the prosecutor.
Exactly. Cody, what do we know about the reconstructed tail light? Because I think this is significant as well.
Well, Vinnie, once we see when that tail light is reconstructed from all the different pieces, there's a missing piece of the red glass. You can see there on your screen, it's kind of to the top left of where the cursor is in that little black area. That's a missing piece. Now, that's a big deal because the prosecution talks about all these different pieces that were recovered from 34 Fairview, but that missing piece was not found. Now, a logical deduction is that this piece would have had to been from hitting O'Keefe's car in that driveway, or at least that's what the jury may be left to assume.
Yeah. So, Mike, from the laser scan and the way they depict the contact to that missing piece, which would be the partially broken taillight that the defense is talking about, does that match up?
I don't think it does, Vinnie. I mean, I think they're two separate stories, and the jury's going to have to decide which one they believe. One is backed by science and a scan that places things in a way that you can actually understand it. The other, if I'm understanding it right, is still, you know, there might be something out there.
All right, Mike King, Cody Thomas staying with us. Still to come. Should the jury trust the time variance?
The time of that event with the clock variance adjusted is 12:32:04 to between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12.
A VPI special report.
The P. Diddy sex abuse scandal that has rocked Hollywood and the world of hip-hop.
The downfall of a music mogul.
Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years.
An all-new look at the evidence and the latest from inside the courtroom.
That was the moment when everything changed.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, a Diddy special report. Next Wednesday night, 9/8 Central on Court TV.
When you apply that variance between the Lexus clock and Mr. O'Keefe's phone, what is the time of that event?
The time of that event with the clock variance adjusted is 12:32:04 to between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12.
I told you this hour was important, extremely important in understanding the prosecution case and certain elements of their case that, wow, they need this jury to buy in a big, big way for them to prove their case and for them to win this case and get a conviction against Karen Read. Now, this is Shannon Burgess, the controversial expert for the prosecution, who was testifying about these time variances. This is a huge issue. It's also, again, something that didn't line up perfectly for prosecutors, but based upon this testimony, if you buy in, it does line up perfectly. Let's take a listen.
If we think back to the last slide, we've identified the three-point turn event in both the data sets. So now if we want to adjust one clock to the other, we can do that. And doing that, we've identified that the variance is between 21 and 29 seconds. So we would need to adjust the Lexus clock forward by 21 to 29 seconds to synchronize it with the iPhone data.
Okay, so prosecutors are getting data from different devices, the text stream from the Lexus, they're getting it from the iPhone, they're getting it from apps on the iPhone, the Apple Health, Waze, they're getting times from all different places. And they want everything to line up. So to do that, especially with the data coming from the Lexus, they had to do a time variance, where they had to shift time. This is a big deal, because if the time isn't shifted, it could be game over for the prosecution, which brings us to the next question in our investigation. Should the jury trust the time variance? Is this something you can trust, once again, beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the burden of proof? Joining me, still with us, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and retired investigator and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, author of the book Deceived, Mike King. All right, Cody, how is the defense pushed back against this time variance?
Well, Vinnie, Alessi questioned Judson Welcher during a voir dire before his testimony actually began. And what Alessi was trying to do during this questioning is emphasize to Welcher and to the jury who's sitting there listening that in this case, seconds matter. Take a listen.
But my question, sir, is the change means now that with the Mr. Burgess variance moving, you now have part of the moving range that occurs after the device lock, whereas before your change, the device lock occurred after every bit of your range of 1162.2. I have that correct, don't I, sir?
You do.
Okay.
And Vinnie, I did misspeak right there. The jury was not listening, as that was a voir dire. But moving on, that brings us to the actual timeline. So follow me here, because it gets a little dicey with all this time shifting and these times. So we built these timelines. This is the first one based on the original data, and we built one after the time shift variance. The yellow data points mark the Lexus. The white data points mark John O'Keefe's phone. Now, in this original data, we see two trigger events. The first being the Lexus three-point turn, and the second being the end of the Lexus's backing up maneuver. The three-point turn for the Lexus occurs, as you see, at 12:23:38. But you also see the three-point turn happening for John O'Keefe's phone at 12:23:59. So there's a clear time discrepancy there. And you also see O'Keefe's phone locking for the last time outside the window for the second trigger event, which leaves the question, how could O'Keefe have locked his phone at that time? So now we move along to once the time variance is applied. Now, once it is adjusted, we get to the point where the Lexus's 3-point turn now matches O'Keefe's phone at 12:23:59. But since they shifted that first trigger event, they naturally have to shift the second one. And when that 21 to 29 second variance adjustment is applied, O'Keefe's phone locking for the last time now falls within the window of the second trigger event, which falls more in line with the prosecution's story, which leaves the question, what does this mean for the jury when digesting and dissecting all of this, when they eventually have to go into deliberations about it?
And just like the videos here, everything is a little fuzzy, a little gray, and open to a little bit of interpretation. So let's bring in Mike King. Mike, should the jury trust this time variance?
If they believe the data and they believe the testimony of how that was received, they should absolutely believe the timeline. And I would hate to be on either side of this one because it is so confusing to me, and I even understand the times that they're talking about and the data that they've extracted, Vinny. So for me, I would be focusing a whole lot more on what I thought was probably the most compelling part of Welcher's testimony, that deliberate transition from drive to reverse. And I would just really hammer home, hey, this is what the science is saying, and pray that that jury believes Burgess. And I felt like Welcher was very credible.
Yeah, and when I look at this issue, right, I understand what they're saying is that the clocks are out of sync, right? The way that they keep time in the infotainment center inside your Lexus is different than the phone, so they have to get them in sync, and they use the 3-point turn timing to get them in sync, and that's why they slide that forward. But what's interesting is they chose not to slide the other one backwards. Right? If you slide, you can sync things up two ways. You can slide one thing this way, or you can slide something this way. And the way they chose to slide, everything works out perfectly for them.
Yeah.
Should the jury trust that choice?
Agreed. And the fact that this came in the 11th hour, that all of a sudden we discovered this. And that doesn't mean that it's false. It just means that it's more questionable, and it makes you question what was going on in this thing. So again, I think it's going to boil down to, do you trust the testimony and the data, or are you gonna go with the emotion of what we've seen about some of the malarkey that's gone on in this case?
Well, a big thank you. We always trust that he will provide incredible insight. Mike King, thank you. Cody Thomas, we trust you will provide great reporting, as always. Thank you both so much. Now, expert testimony can be powerful, especially when it all lines up with other facts in the case. But most of the time, each side has their own experts. And if they cancel each other out, the jury will often fall back and resort to common sense and other uncontroverted evidence. The question is, in this case, which theory does that prove? I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.